Welcome, dear brave soul. You're tuning into Horror Podcast, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. It's been years since I left that house, but I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. Living there was one of those experiences that slowly eats at your nerves, even if you don't realize it while you're in the middle of it. At first, it seemed like just another weird roommate situation, the kind you laugh about later. But the longer I lived there, the more convinced I became that I hadn't just been living with an eccentric or an addict. I'd been living with someone who might have been a predator in the making, maybe worse. My name's Chris, and in the summer of 2014, I was 24 and broke. Rent in Denver was climbing fast, and I needed somewhere cheap, even if it wasn't ideal. That's how I ended up living with Tyler. He was the landlord as well as my housemate, and he seemed normal enough when I signed the lease. A little awkward, sure, but not in a way that raised alarms. The only thing that stuck out at the time was how adamant he was about the basement. He made it very clear that I was never go down there. He didn't explain why, just repeated that it was off limits. I thought it was odd, but I needed the room badly, and people have their quirks. I told myself not to overthink it. It didn't take long for me to see that Tyler wasn't as normal as I'd first thought. He was the kind of guy who carried himself like he was holding back 100 unspoken thoughts, like you only ever saw the surface of what was going on inside him. He worked in IT, made good money, and seemed stable on paper, but he also used meth heavily. That part surprised me. Not that someone used drugs, but how well he functioned despite it. He'd work long hours during the week, then disappear into binges at night and on weekends. During those times, his mouth ran nonstop. He'd ramble about everything from conspiracy theories to his childhood to things you'd never want to hear anyone joke about. One of his favorite lines was about the smell of chemicals. More than once, he told me, "If you ever smell bleach or lye coming from the basement, don't worry about it." The first couple times, I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was just being weird. But the third or fourth time, I asked him why he kept saying that. He grinned, leaned in like it was some inside joke, and said, "That's what I use to clean up after the bodies." I tried to brush it off as a bad joke, but it got under my skin. The way he said it didn't feel like humor. It felt like testing, like he wanted to see how I'd react. Tyler also had this fixation with my schedule. He'd ask when I was leaving, when I'd be back, if I had to work late, things that seemed casual at first but became unsettling over time. Once, I took a surprise day off, and when he realized I was home, he looked shocked, almost panicked. That day, I heard all kinds of noises from the basement. Heavy clanging, muffled sounds I couldn't make out. His car was in the driveway, but he wasn't anywhere in the main house. I couldn't shake the thought that he hadn't expected me to be there while he was doing whatever it was he did down there. Other times, he blasted music so loud the walls vibrated. Sometimes it was heavy metal. Sometimes it was just NPR talk radio at insane volumes. It didn't make sense unless you thought about it as cover noise. In retrospect, I can't help but think he was trying to mask whatever was happening in the basement. He also made comments about sex workers. "You can do whatever you want," he once said, almost casually. "You can choke them, beat them, even kill them. Nobody cares." I told him that was fucked up, but he just smirked and doubled down. He'd go on about how he was a respectable white guy with a good job, a house, and money, so the police would never suspect him of anything. It wasn't just bravado. It was said with this eerie confidence, like he'd thought about it a lot. I knew he paid for sex sometimes. That in itself didn't bother me. It was his business, but paired with the way he spoke about women, It turned my stomach. It felt like he was telling me more than I wanted to know. Then there was the smell. One afternoon while doing laundry in the garage, I caught it. Faint at first, but enough to stop me in my tracks. It was the smell of decomposition. I grew up in upstate New York, and I knew that smell from finding dead animals in barns and fields. There were no animals in the garage, and no way something had crawled into the walls. I stood there frozen, my mind spinning. Later, I brought up to Tyler in a roundabout way. I made a joke out of his own joke, telling him he needed to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled something in the garage. The moment I said it, his eyes widened, and he glared at me with this sharp, almost startled look. It wasn't the look of someone being teased. It was fear, maybe even anger. He stumbled over his words before finally saying, "What? Really?" I told him yes, really. There was a long, tense silence before he muttered, "Thanks for letting me know," and walked off to his room without another word. A few days later, while I was doing laundry again, he called down from the crawl space above the garage. He was up there for some reason, and he told me to come up and take a look at something. My whole body locked up. It was like every instinct in me screamed that if I went up there, I wouldn't come back down. I mumbled some excuse about having to be somewhere, stuffed my laundry into a bag, and got out of the house. The longer I lived there, the worse it got. He started showing me things, disturbing videos he made, mixing images of women tied up with distorted audio screaming. There was a character he kept coming back to, someone in a plague doctor mask, looming in the background of his projects. He'd laugh like it was just edgy art, but I couldn't shake how sinister it felt. I finally left in late 2015, without notice. I packed up what little I had and left for good, heading west to join friends at a protest camp. My last night there, he started up again with the same kind of talk, describing murder and violence like it was a joke. This time, I didn't laugh or pretend. I told him he'd get caught eventually. His expression hardened. He looked at me dead serious and said, "They'll never catch me. I'm the last person they'd ever suspect." There was no smirk, no grin, no playfulness in his voice, just conviction. For months after leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. I kept asking myself if I should have gone to the police, if I'd ignored something dangerous. Eventually, I did call Crime Stoppers, anonymously. I told them everything I've told here. To my surprise, the operator kept putting me on hold because a sergeant wanted details. They asked about his car, his house, the things he'd said. They seemed interested, but I never heard anything back. Years later, my mom looked up the old house on Google Street View. There was a big enclosed trailer in the driveway, something that hadn't been there when I lived there. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was moving or hauling junk. But the first thought that came to my mind wasn't innocent. It never is when it comes to Tyler. I've lived around addicts, criminals, and plenty of sketchy people. None of them ever unsettled me the way he did. It wasn't just the drugs or the basement or the comments. It was the way everything added up, piece by piece, into something I can't unsee. I'll never know if he really was what I think he was. Maybe he was just a deeply disturbed man playing with fantasies. But deep down, I don't believe that. I believe I lived with someone who was capable of killing, and I hope to God I never cross paths with him again. There are certain moments in life where you realize only years later how much danger you were actually in. The memory plays back in your mind like a movie, except every time you watch it, you notice another detail that makes your skin crawl. For me, that moment was a car ride I should have never taken, one that I still think about nearly 20 years later. My name's Lauren, and this happened back in the summer of 2004 in Louisville, Kentucky. I was 20 years old, broke, and trying to figure out life on my own. I'd just gotten out of a bad relationship and was juggling part-time work and raising my son. Most days, I walked everywhere. It wasn't ideal, but I didn't have a car, and the daycare was close enough that I could manage. That day was hot, one of those sticky, humid afternoons where the air feels heavy, like it presses down on you. The kind of day where your clothes cling and the heat rising from the pavement makes you dizzy if you stand still too long. I was wearing shorts and a tank top, the only way to tolerate the heat, and I was still skinny then, almost too skinny. People sometimes mistook me for a sex worker, especially in certain neighborhoods. It wasn't fair, but it happened often enough that I stopped being surprised. I hated the way men slowed their cars when they saw me, leaning out windows, honking, shouting things that felt like violations even if they never laid a hand on me. That day was no different. A group of guys in a pickup truck slowed down and started yelling at me as they passed. They circled back twice, hooting out the windows, their laughter carrying down the street. My chest tightened with every lap they made. I tried to ignore them, kept my eyes forward, but my stomach was knotted and my pace quickened. That's when a car pulled into a gas station lot just as I was walking by. It was a newer model sedan, shiny, spotless, the kind of car you notice because it looks cared for. The driver leaned across the seat, rolled down his window, and asked if I needed a ride. He didn't look threatening, mid-20s, well-groomed, even attractive in that clean-cut way that puts you at ease. His shirt was pressed, his hair neatly styled. He smiled like he understood how uncomfortable I'd been with the truck full of guys. And I was naive enough to think, this feels safer. So I said yes. I climbed into the passenger seat, my legs sticking slightly to the leather from the heat, and he asked where I was headed. I told him, straight down the road, just a mile, not far at all. Simple. But instead of turning the direction I needed, he eased the car the other way. The movement was so smooth it almost didn't register. When I pointed it out, he smiled without missing a beat and said he just needed to turn around. His voice was calm, easy, practiced. I nodded and stayed quiet, convincing myself it was nothing. He started asking me questions. Where I was from, what I did, if I had kids. His tone was light, conversational, but his eyes flicked over to me just a little too often, as though he was studying my answers. I told him bits of the truth, that I was staying at a women's shelter, that I had a son, and that I was on my way to pick him up. At the time, I thought I was just making conversation, filling the air. Later, I'd realized that what I told him may have been the only reason I made it out of that car alive, by letting him know that someone was expecting me. And soon, I made myself harder to disappear. A few blocks later, he turned down another street, not the way I recognized. The houses grew farther apart, trees arching overhead. I didn't know the area well, so when I asked, he said he was taking a shortcut. His tone was casual, but my gut didn't buy it. My stomach twisted, and I could feel that quiet alarm ringing in the back of my head, the one you can't explain, but know better than to ignore. Then I caught it, the smell. At first, it was faint, like something spoiled left too long in the sun. But as the car moved, it seemed to grow sharper, heavier, until I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. It filled my nose, thick and sour, clinging to the air like it had been soaked into the fabric. I glanced into the back seat, expecting maybe trash, food containers, something spilled. But the car was spotless, immaculately clean. Not a crumb, not a bag, not even dust. I wrinkled my nose and asked him about it. Do you smell that? What is that? He brushed it off quickly, almost too quickly. Said he must have left something in the car that had gone bad. Maybe some groceries or old takeout. But there was nothing in sight. His voice was smooth, but it didn't sound convincing. My pulse spiked. I couldn't place the smell at the time, but I know now. It was the smell of decomposition. Death. A few minutes later, it got stronger, thick enough that I felt my throat tighten. I couldn't help myself. I asked again, seriously, what is that smell? This time, his jaw tightened for just a second before he forced another smile. The kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. He repeated that he didn't know, maybe something he forgot to take out. His words were steady, but there was something off in the way he said them, something rehearsed, like he'd had to say that before. My hands were slick with sweat, and my heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept talking. I filled the silence with chatter about my son, about how the daycare knew exactly when to expect me, about how people kept close track of where I was supposed to be. I don't even know why I said it that way, but something in me knew I had to. I wanted him to believe that I would be missed quickly if anything happened. I forced my voice to stay light, even as every part of me screamed to get out of that car. Eventually, he pulled back onto the right road. The car slowed in front of the daycare, and without a word, I climbed out. No name exchanged, no request for my number, no lingering small talk. It was like he wanted me gone, like I had become too much of a risk. The relief I felt stepping out onto the curb was so strong my knees nearly buckled. I walked into the daycare, my hands trembling, trying to act normal while every nerve in me buzzed. At the time, I didn't think much more about it. I brushed it off as a strange ride with a stranger, a creepy encounter I could put behind me. But months later, when I encountered that same smell again, this time from a dead raccoon in the crawl space of the shelter, the memory snapped back with brutal clarity. That smell in his car had been the same, and now I knew exactly what it meant. I can't prove who he was or what he'd done. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just a paranoid young woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. But every instinct in me tells me otherwise. I know what I smelled. I know how he looked at me when I asked about it. And I know the only reason I got out of that car was because I told him someone was expecting me soon and would notice if I didn't show. It's been years since then, and I still replay that ride in my head. I think about the turns he made, the smell in the air, the forced calm in his voice. I think about the way the back seat looked too clean, almost sterile, like nothing had ever touched it, or like something had, and he'd scrub it away. I think about how close I came to vanishing into nothing more than another unsolved case. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the smallest words I said without even realizing their weight. But either way, I'll never forget the smell. Some stories sit like a stone in your chest. They don't go away, even when you try to bury them under years of silence. They just wait until you finally speak, and when you do, the weight shifts but never really lifts. That's how this feels, like something I've carried too long. The words have cut grooves in me from being held back, and letting them out now doesn't erase what happened. It just gives shape to the heaviness that's been there all along. My name's Claire. And a year ago, I told authorities something I've been holding in for decades. I told them that my late father was a murderer. Not just once, not just twice, but over and over again, stretching across years. If I'm right, the number of victims could climb into the dozens. Some people call it delusion, some call it betrayal, but I call it the truth. And I can tell you, when the truth has followed you since childhood, it doesn't matter how loudly others dismiss it. You still hear it breathing in every quiet room. The land we grew up on sits outside of Redfield, Iowa, tucked behind fields of corn and timber that press close to the dirt roads. It looks ordinary enough. A white farmhouse with peeling paint, the kind of place where shutters hang crooked and the porch steps sag in the middle. A sagging barn whose roof had long since started to bow in on itself. A shallow creek that cut across the back acreage, winding lazily through weeds and brush before slipping into thicker woods. To most people driving past, it was just another piece of Midwest farmland. Nothing remarkable, nothing sinister, but I know what's under it. I know what was put there. For as long as I can remember, my father was a hard man. Hard in the way that made the air heavy when he entered a room. He drank too much, gambled away money he didn't have, and carried a rage that seemed to follow him like a shadow that never let him rest. He was clever enough to hide it from strangers. Around town, he wore the mask of a strict farmer, someone who worked hard, kept to himself, maybe grumbled too much but never crossed the line. Inside our house, it was different. His rules were sharp and absolute, and breaking them meant pain. Pain that was sudden and unrelenting. The older I got, the more I realized that pain didn't stop with us. When I was a girl, I noticed the women first. They weren't the kind of women who belonged in a small town where everybody knew everybody. They were strangers, women from Des Moines, from Omaha, sometimes even farther, their clothes and mannerisms marking them as outsiders from the start. They never stayed long. Sometimes my father would bring them around in his truck, half drunk, introducing them with a grin that felt wrong, like he was proud of something only he understood. Other times, he'd vanish for a night, leaving us tense and listening for the door, and come back with mud crusted into the soles of his boots, and that same sour smell clinging to his clothes, heavy enough to make my stomach knot. There were nights he'd wake us, ordering me and my siblings to help him move things we didn't want to see. Black garbage bags, knotted tight, heavy shapes wrapped in tarps, awkward to lift, thudding when they hit the truck bed. He'd take us to the edge of the woods, or out near the old well at the bottom of the hill where the ground was soft and hidden from the road. I was too young to understand fully, but old enough to know that what we were doing was wrong. The night air would be damp against my skin, the beam of a flashlight cutting across weeds, and my father's voice low and stern telling us to keep quiet. He'd tell us no one would believe us anyway. He was right about that, at least. Years later, I realized what he had made us accomplices to. He'd killed them. Most were women who lived on the edge of society, sex workers, runaways, women nobody in our town would ask about. That's what made it easy for him. No one came looking. No one cared. He knew how to pick the forgotten, and that was his protection. He taught us to drag those heavy bags into the earth and pretend nothing happened. He taught us that silence was safer than the truth. When I finally told the sheriff last year, I said I believed there were dozens of bodies. Maybe 60, maybe 70. I know that sounds impossible, like a child's exaggeration, but I lived there. I saw how often he brought women back. I saw how often he left without them. He was careful in his own twisted way. He chose women the world didn't value. He buried them deep, in places he knew no one would bother to dig. And he counted on all of us, his children, his neighbors, the town itself, being too scared or too indifferent to speak. The sheriff didn't dismiss me outright. He listened long enough to bring cadaver dogs out to the property. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me still convinced no one would ever take me seriously. But the dogs circled, sniffed, and gave the kind of hits that make your stomach drop. They scratched at the ground, sat back, and signaled in the exact places I remembered. More than once. In the same spots where I used to stand frozen, watching my father shovel dirt over bags I try not to picture split open. The dogs can't testify in court, but their signals told me I wasn't crazy. There's something buried there, something that shouldn't be. Still, there are hurdles. The old well where many of the bodies might be is nearly 90 feet deep and filled in years ago with rubble, brush, and dirt. Excavating it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The county doesn't have that kind of money lying around. Officials talk about grants, about logistics, about permits, while the land sits quiet and the secret waits beneath it. Every season that passes, roots tangle deeper, mud hardens, and time makes the work harder. But time doesn't erase bones. They stay. Not everyone believes me. My sister, Ruth, called me a liar in the papers. She said our father was strict, not violent. Said she would have known if he were a murderer, but she wasn't there the way I was. She didn't see what I saw, or maybe she did and can't bear to face it. She says the cadaver dogs could have hit on animal remains. And sure, there were dogs buried on the property. A stillborn calf once, too. I remember digging that grave myself. But trained dogs don't mistake human for animal. Even handlers said that. And in my gut, I know the truth. People ask me why I didn't come forward sooner. I tell them I tried. I told teachers, priests, even law enforcement when I was a teenager. No one listened. They looked at me like I was troubled, like I was making it up to get attention. And maybe they want to believe that. Because if a man like my father, an ordinary farmer with calloused hands and a foul temper, was capable of killing dozens of women, then what did that say about the safety of any small town? What did that say about the blind spots in our communities? It was easier to call me a liar than to consider that the man they waved to at the feed store had bodies buried on his land. My brother didn't live long enough to tell his side. He died by suicide years ago, and I wonder if it was because he couldn't carry the weight anymore. He drank hard toward the end, and sometimes when he called me late at night, I heard the things he couldn't bring himself to say out loud. My other sister keeps quiet except when reporters call. She defends him, maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of fear, maybe because some lies are easier to live inside than the truth. As for me, I don't have fear left, just a need for the truth to come out. My father died in 2014 at 76 years old. To most of the community, he'll be remembered as a stubborn, hard-drinking man with a mean streak, but nothing more. To me, he'll always be the man who dragged garbage bags into the woods, who smelled of bleach and lie, who made us accomplices in something we didn't choose. His shadow still falls over that land, even though his body is long gone. I don't tell this story because I want revenge. I tell it because I want closure, for the women who never came back, for the families who never knew where their daughters went, for my own peace. I want those bones pulled from the ground, laid out in the open where the lies can't cover them anymore. I want people to see what silence protected. It's been nearly 20 years since I last walked that property. The barn has collapsed into itself, its ribs of wood jutting up like broken bones. The farmhouse is empty, its windows gaping, curtains long gone. The creek still runs shallow, winding through the same land where I know he buried secrets. When I close my eyes, I can still see him, standing by the well with a shovel in his hands, his face lit by the truck's headlights, the night air thick with silence and fear. Some people don't believe me. Maybe they never will. But the land remembers. The soil remembers. And I believe the truth is still down there, waiting, pressed into dirt and stone where even lies can't keep it hidden forever. Because no matter how many years pass, bones don't lie.